Oh, hello there. So, we're going to talk a little bit today about mixing. I'm going to be doing some videos where I talk about my process in the studio. This stuff isn't going to be super technical. It's going to be a lot about process and workflow. There might be technical details that I leave out here or there. I'm totally open to doing some follow-up videos on those if people want to see them, so leave a comment or hit me up on the platforms if you think that would be a good idea. What we're going to be covering today is the least sexy, most boring part of the whole process, which is track prep and analysis. And this is one of those things that you get better at over time, mostly because you get tired of suffering later on with having too many tracks, with not knowing what's going on, with getting confused during the process. Did I already say that? Anyway, this is a project, an album I'm mixing for Kyle Ter and produced by my good friend Haj. And I'm getting the sessions as Ableton Live sets instead of audio. We have pretty similar computer environments, so plugins aren't a huge problem. All of the virtual instruments get bounced down, but everything else gets sent as is. And then if there's a plugin problem, I ask for the audio to be sent separately. And what's great about this is that this really allows me to analyze the song on a deep level, to export things how I want, even though I leave a lot of things alone, and to go back and get something from the original set if I need it to change. For example, I want to turn off an effect or something like that. So this next video that's coming up is going to show me going through the Ableton Live set, showing you the kind of things that I'm looking for when I'm preparing the mix, which is then going to be opened up in Logic. And I'm going to talk a little bit later in another video about why I'm not just mixing it in Live. It's probably going to look like an awful lot of work to prepare, but I've just learned over time. This entire process that I'm, boiling down to 15 minutes in this video was probably about an hour and a half to do the whole thing. What I end up with is a pile of notes that look like this. Hell, writing them down on paper helps me to remember, and then they're there for me to refer back to as I get deeper into the process. One of the things I mentioned in the video is that I'm going to a lot of trouble to save some presets and to document things, because this is a case where the material's complex and they like the rough mixes. So there's certain balances I really want to preserve going into it. However, even if this is a case where, you're going to do faders down and just bring up one sound at a time, some of what I'm doing here is still really good stuff. It keeps you humble to really go through, respect what the producer did, understand it. Don't throw out their reverb just because you think yours is better. Have a reason for doing everything. Spend a little time really listening, really being thoughtful about the material. All right, so that's what we're going to be looking at today. Let me see, is there anything else I forgot to talk about? I made a few notes. No, I think this is pretty good, so let's get into it. What I'm doing during this part of the process is I'm inspecting and I'm taking some notes on the groups and then on the individual tracks. Typically, I'm doing very, very little with the individual tracks. I'm not making notes on every single one. I'm only making notes if there's something notable or there's something that I've decided to change during the export process. The groups, on the other hand, I do a pretty good inspection of, because when I move this song into Logic, what I'm going to be bringing in most of the time are all of the individual tracks, and then I'm going to be recreating the groups, right? And in some cases, tracks are going to move to different groups. For example, in this song, there are a couple of tracks in the effect group that have real harmonic content, okay? In other words, instead of, being a riser or an impact of some sort, okay, it's got a specific tonality and a rhythm to it, so that I'm going to group with other similar parts, other things that are going on in the mid-range and adding melodic or harmonic content to the song. However, in many other cases, the groups are going to stay the same. Occasionally, I'm going to come across a group. This one's a really good example. You don't see this every day, where this drum group has a whole bunch of things going on, but if we take a quick listen to it, it's the kind of thing that in the final mix, I may just use the stereo output of the group and not worry about mixing the individual tracks. It's nicely balanced, and also the processing on the group, in this case, this API Vision channel strip, has really been used by the producer to very great effect. You know, there's some serious compression going on. There's some really effective EQ. So the group really has a sound. So this is a case where, even though I'm still going to export all of the individual tracks, I've made a note to myself that it's worth giving a try of just using the Drum 2 group. And when I set up the session, I'll show you this later on, I'm actually going to bring everything in, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to start out just by using the output of the Drums 2 group. And then later on, if I decide there's really something I need to get in there and mess with, I'll then go to the original tracks and I'll do it there. And because I may need to manually recreate this group later by enabling all of these individual tracks and then processing them in the Logic session, what I've done is I've gone in and I've saved a preset of this channel strip. Okay, and the name of the song is Another Day. So what I've done here is I've made a folder full of presets. And these are all presets that are just settings used on the group track of that particular group. Now, in many cases, these presets are just kind of documenting what's there. They're not always things that I'm necessarily intending to use or to copy exactly, but it's important for me to have them, because the folks who originally produced it are really clear that they like the way the rough mixes are sounding. They really want me to use them as a jumping off point. So this isn't something where I'm trying to just bring all the faders down and just bring every sound up one by one and kind of reconstruct the sound stage based on what sounds good to me at the moment. Instead, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get something very close to what's here in the live set as a starting point, and then I'm going to focus on solving problems and sweetening things and really just trying to create the best version of their mix that I can. And, you know, that's maybe a little bit of an overstatement. There are things along the line that change and may really change the character of the final product, but it's a very different mindset to really try to start with where the producer has left off, as opposed to treating everything as raw material and going from there. One of the other things that I'm doing in my notes is I'm making a note of the volume of every single group, right? So I know that as I construct things, I'm going to route all of these individual tracks to buses in Logic, and then I know what to set the volume of that bus at, so that, again, I'm starting from roughly the same point. Okay, this is also why it's important for me to take a look at some of these processors that are sitting on the group tracks in particular, because in some cases they're affecting the gain as well. So even if I decide that I'm going to do some different processing on this bus, I want to save that preset so that at least at a starting point I can say, okay, you know, I'm actually losing a few dB of gain, but, you know, we're boosting 500 hertz, and that just gives me an idea what my starting point is, regardless of how I actually work with that track. And like I said, because I'm changing some of the groupings, none of this is a strict apples to apples comparison, but I'm really giving myself all of the information I need to get the new mix starting from more or less the same point. When I go into the individual tracks, I'm listening to some things soloed, and I'm also just looking for processing that appears to be extreme or appears to be something that I may want to review. Now, this is an example of a vocal track that has a few different UAD plugs on here, the UAD Helios EQ, the 1073, and the LA2A. And what I saw very quickly when I looked at these and also listened to the track is that they're all being used in a very gentle, very tasteful way. And there's really no need for me to concern myself too much exactly with what's going on in each plugin. The way that I'm looking at it is, these are all things that could have even been used in a recording chain, right? So to get a vocal track that was recorded with the 1073 boosting a little bit of top, even the LA2A is really doing, well, in this case, it's changing the gain a little bit, and we're getting the color of each of these processors. So I'm just looking at it as if these vocals were tracked through this analog signal chain, and I'm not worrying about the specifics of it. It sounds good. There's no need for me to mess with it. It's a great starting point. Now, there are some cases where, when I listen to the track soloed, I maybe hear something that gives me pause for a moment. For example, this kick drum is being processed with the Rough Rider compressor, which is a really cool free compressor made by Audio Damage. And there's a little bit of clipping coming out of the compressor, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but given now that I've listened to the song, given where I'm thinking this kick might sit in the mix, there's a chance that I may want it to really be very, very clean and very, very focused. So what I've done is I've created a duplicate version of the track, and I've just turned off the Rough Rider compressor. So when I set up the new session for the mix, I'm going to use the original track so that I hear, the way that it was intended to sit in the mix, at least in the rough. But as I get into the process, if I really do want a cleaner version without that clipping in it, I'm going to use a different compressor, or I'm going to do something where I'm approximating the vibe, because the compressor is giving it a lot of additional punch. Giving it more aggressive attack and also quite a bit of additional gain. So I'll have it there for reference, but it's something that I can make a decision at the time of the mix. And this is the only case in this particular mix where I did this. So this is not something I'm doing all the time, but it is a handy technique. So this kalimba track, these two kalimbas are grouped together, which during the production process, makes perfect sense. But when I heard it, okay, this is definitely a bass part in my thinking, and so I'm going to be grouping that together with other low instruments. There are some bass synths, because I really want to make sure that I really know where all my low end is in the mix. Right, so any tonal low end parts, I can be comparing them to the kick drum and really making sure the low end is sorted out. So in this case, this kalimba group isn't going to be there at all when I set up the other mix. This low one is going to get moved into a bass group, and then the other one is going to share a group with some other more mid-rangey parts, possibly in fact, definitely those effects that I showed you earlier in this video. And then once this is all done, I'm also going to take a look at all of the returns. So these are all going to get exported as audio as well. And for these, what I'm going to have to do is go through and simply give a listen to hear how many instruments or vocals are running through them. One of the things I've also made a note of is that for certain of these returns, there's quite a bit of automation. Right, so this is something that I need to take special note of, because even if I were to decide to use a different reverb in the final mix, I have to kind of know where some of these automations are happening. Now, some of these reverbs that are being automated, this Lexicon, this is a great sounding reverb, so I'm not going out of my way to replace anything that I don't have to. What I'm going to be doing is setting up the mix without any effects. And then once things are a little further along, I'm going to import the audio from these different effect returns. In the case of some of these delays, they're very simple to use as is, because mostly what they are is they're delay tails, very often automated delay tails on different sounds. So those are just going to pop right in and work as is. The only thing that I'm going to be listening for is to hear if an effect return has been used for a lot of different instruments or vocals. Now, it actually doesn't really even matter so much if it's a lot, but in a case like this, if I listen to the mix and I determine, oh yeah, okay, the sound of this reverb, this is really important for the sound of the vocals or this particular synth, then what I'm going to do is I'm either or both save a preset based on this particular reverb, so I can just, again, use it as a starting point in my mix. Okay, my impression just from that little snippet that we listened to is that there's really a lot of it on that bassy synth that's coming through. And very often a reverb on a synth sound like that, it really becomes, it's part of the sound design. It's part of the vibe. So I'm going to do one of two things. I'm either going to use this reverb with this preset saved in the final mix, or in this case, more likely what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to export two different versions of this return, because this only takes another minute, and it makes it really easy once I get into the mix to just hear what my options are. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to export one version of it with the vocal with all of the vocals muted. So I'm going to get a version of the reverb that just has the synth reverb on it. And then I'm going to do another version with those synths muted, so I get just the vocal reverb. And that way I can pop the two in and really hear if they're both working as is. And if I decide that I can do better, at least I had those reverbs as a starting point. But again, in a case like this where I know that the client is really happy with where the music's at, they just want it to, be bigger and better, I'm going to, wherever I can, use the stuff from the original sessions wherever possible. So that gives you an idea what my preparation process looks like. The next thing we're going to look at is how things get set up in Logic, and also I'll talk a little bit more about why I'm not just mixing this in live, because you might at this point be thinking, wow, this sure looks like a lot of extra work to go work in a different program. So in the next one, we'll revisit that. So thanks for watching, and we will talk soon.